Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Territory of Cinema channel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. Today, we are going to discuss the movie The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift from 2011. The neon-drenched streets of Tokyo become the unlikely backdrop for another chapter in the saga, though this one shifts focus entirely, landing on Sean Boswell, a young American with a knack for finding trouble and an almost pathological need to prove himself behind the wheel. Sean's reckless street racing in the American Southwest, a habit likely born from youthful rebellion and perhaps a touch of inherited competitive spirit. Maybe his father, a Navy man, was always pushing him toward victory in one form or another, lands him in hot water one too many times. To avoid juvenile detention, his mother ships him off to live with his estranged father in Japan. Tokyo is a different beast entirely. The organized chaos of the city's infrastructure is starkly contrasted by the underground drifting scene, a ballet of controlled chaos that Sean initially observes with a mix of awe and skepticism. He quickly finds himself drawn to the intoxicating dance of the drift, a driving style completely unlike the drag racing he's used to back home. His first encounter with this world is less than graceful. He stumbles into a local street race, immediately challenges the reigning king, Takashi, and proceeds to embarrass himself spectacularly in a borrowed car, showing he has the guts but none of the necessary finesse. This failure immediately marks him as an outsider, a loud, clumsy gaijin trying to play with the masters. Takashi, nicknamed DK or Drift King, is the epitome of cool precision, a legacy driver whose father is deeply connected to the Yakuza, a lineage that grants him both respect and fear on the streets. Takashi views Sean as an insignificant annoyance, an amateur who needs to be swiftly removed from his territory. Sean's salvation, or perhaps his second big gamble, arrives in the form of Han Lue. Han, a seasoned veteran who operates with a philosophical detachment, almost like a street-smart sage, recognizes the raw, unrefined potential in Sean. Han, whose backstory is shrouded in rumor, some say he was a former associate of the legendary Dom Toretto, having learned the value of family and the cold reality of life on the edge, takes Sean under his wing. Han isn't just teaching Sean how to drive, he's teaching him how to drift, how to feel the car communicate with the pavement, viewing the act of drifting less as a competition and more as an art form. Han's approach is about balance, patience, and knowing when to let go. Lessons that apply equally to racing and to life. Living with Han, Sean starts to blend into the fringes of the Tokyo scene. He repairs and customizes an old Nissan Silvia S15, pouring his frustration and his newfound understanding of the craft into the machine. He also develops a complicated relationship with Neela, Takashi's girlfriend, who possesses an intuitive understanding of cars herself and seems drawn to Sean's straightforward authenticity, a stark contrast to Takashi's controlling nature. This burgeoning connection further fuels the animosity between the two rivals. The stakes escalate quickly. The debt owed by Sean's father, likely financial or perhaps a favor owed to Han's criminal associates, becomes tangled up in the racing world. Han, ever the pragmatist, uses the races as a means to settle these complex obligations, positioning Sean not just as a competitor, but as a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game involving significant sums of money and Yakuza influence. The climax arrives during a crucial race. Han, after delivering a final cryptic piece of advice to Sean, something about the purity of the chase and the necessity of moving forward, takes on Takashi in what is clearly intended to be his last major run. It's a breathtaking display of skill, but in a shocking turn, Han's car is violently T-boned by an unknown vehicle, signaling his apparent death and shattering the newfound sense of belonging Sean had found. This moment serves as a brutal reminder that in this world, loyalty often comes at the highest cost. Grief-stricken and fueled by righteous anger, Sean challenges Takashi to a final showdown down Mount Akina, a legendary and treacherous downhill course known for testing the limits of both driver and machine. Driving a borrowed, beautifully balanced, but aging Mazda RX-7 borrowed from Han's stash, Sean finally manages to channel everything Han taught him. He drives with precision, not just matching Takashi's aggression, but exploiting the subtle weaknesses in Takashi's style that Han had likely pointed out. In the final hairpin turn, Sean executes a near-impossible drift, using the steep incline and the centrifugal force to his advantage, effectively sideswiping and spinning out the superior, yet overconfident, Drift King. Victory secured, Sean earns the respect of the remaining crew, including a surprisingly supportive moment from Neela. The film closes with the implication that while Han is gone, his influence remains, and Sean has finally found his place, not just as a racer, but as someone who understands the complex, often perilous code of the underground world he has chosen. The final shots hint that the dangerous elements surrounding Han's death have not been entirely settled, leaving the future paths of Sean and Neela open to further, perhaps more familiar, adventures. The suffocating humidity of Tokyo nights seemed to cling to Sean Boswell, a teenager perpetually out of sync with his surroundings, his American brashness grating against the subtle hierarchies of the Japanese automotive underground. His arrival, necessitated by a near-legal disaster back in the States, a spectacle of scorched rubber and smashed property that probably made his career military father sigh deeply back home, thrust him into a world that valued silence and subtlety over noise and spectacle. He carried the weight of his own expectations, those unspoken demands for success that plague sons trying to escape their father's shadows, and he channeled that pressure into the accelerator. When he first encountered the drift, it wasn't just a race. It was an almost spiritual experience for the observers, a dance on the very edge of adhesion. His initial attempt to mimic this art form, using a hastily procured, likely underpowered vehicle, was an embarrassing display of sheer power, trying to brute force a technique that required finesse. Takashi, the formidable DK, moved with the chilling assurance of someone who inherited not just wealth, but dominance. Takashi wasn't just fast, he was architecturally precise in his technique, a direct result of his powerful family ties that ensured he never truly faced consequence for arrogance. His disdain for Sean was palpable, the kind of casual dismissal reserved for an insect crawling into a perfectly curated garden. Hanlu emerged from the shadows of this world like a ghost with impeccable taste in cars and tailoring. He was the calming center in the storm, a man whose eyes suggested he had seen things that would shatter a younger man's illusions about morality and survival. His reputation preceded him, whispers of past associations with high-level operators, perhaps even hints of former connections to the larger, almost mythic racing families Dom Toretto often spoke of, suggesting he understood the true cost of loyalty versus profit. Han didn't simply teach Sean to drift, he taught him economy of motion, the philosophy that sometimes the best way through a corner is not by fighting the physics, but by momentarily surrendering to them. It was a mentorship rooted in genuine connection, a stark contrast to the transactional nature of the Yakuza world surrounding Takashi. Sean's time rebuilding the S-15 was therapy. Every wrench turn, every piece of wiring connecting the engine to the chassis was a translation of his internal chaos into external control. He found an unlikely ally and source of emotional grounding in Neela. She possessed that rare, innate mechanical empathy, recognizing the soul in the machine, and her quiet strength served as a silent challenge to Takashi's possessiveness. Her attraction to Sean wasn't about bravado, it was about witnessing a genuine struggle for self-definition, something Takashi had long since abandoned in favor of maintaining status. The undercurrent of debt and obligation that surrounded Sean's father's situation was the oil slick under the track surface. Han, operating with his signature calculated risk, used the escalating races as high-stakes collateral management, navigating the treacherous waters between petty street rivalry and serious organized crime leverage. Han knew the danger was closing in, and his mentorship of Sean felt increasingly urgent, as if he were transferring essential survival knowledge before stepping out of the light himself. Han's final run was orchestrated with a dramatic flourish that felt both inevitable and shocking. That moment when his finely tuned machine was obliterated, a brutal, undeniable punctuation mark delivered by an unseen hand, was designed to break Sean. It was the ultimate lesson. In this game, you never truly own the pavement. It owns you. The challenge on Mount Akina was more than just a race. It was an exorcism. Sean was no longer the clumsy American import. He was wielding Han's wisdom like a weapon. Racing the RX-7, a car humming with the ghost of its previous driver, Sean didn't rely on raw speed against Takashi's superior modern machinery. Instead, he used the mountain itself, employing the terrifying commitment Han had drilled into him. That final drift, executed with almost reckless perfection on the tightest turn, wasn't a technical maneuver. It was an act of faith, a final, desperate tribute to the man who taught him how to live on the razor's edge. When Takashi spun out, it wasn't just a loss of a race. It was the collapse of an entire, fragile dynasty built on inherited entitlement. Sean had earned his place not through birthright or intimidation, but through baptism by fire and the rigorous, painful acquisition of true skill, inheriting a mantle carried by an unseen brotherhood. The lingering suspicion that Han's demise was orchestrated rather than accidental served as a cold promise that the true cost of this drifting life was yet to be fully calculated. The immediate aftermath of the victory on Akina brought a fleeting sense of peace, the kind that settles only after a massive storm has passed, leaving behind soaked ruins and fragile clarity. Sean, standing amidst the wreckage of Takashi's pride, felt the heavy mantle of expectation settle upon him. He had achieved the impossible, defeating the local legend, but this victory did not erase the gaping hole left by Han. The crew, now looking to Sean for direction, saw not the clumsy kid who arrived weeks prior, but a survivor who had successfully navigated the treacherous currents of their world. Neela remained close, her presence a quiet anchor against the rising tide of notoriety Sean had attracted. Her understanding of mechanics was now vital, not just for keeping the new, respected machinery running, but perhaps as a shared language to process the unspoken grief. However, the conclusion of the race was merely the end of the first act in a much larger drama. The vehicle that struck Han was not some random element of chance. It was a meticulously planned assassination, a message delivered with lethal efficiency. The Yakuza ties that afforded Takashi his protection were now stretched thin, their influence bruised by the public humiliation of their favored racer. The men responsible for Han's passing, those shadowy figures Han had clearly been evading or working against, would not let such a profound disruption go unaddressed. Sean quickly realized that winning the Drift Crown meant he had inherited not just acclaim, but also the enemies of his mentor. His newfound status elevated him from a mere annoyance to a significant liability in the eyes of the organization Han had perhaps betrayed or defied one time too many. The sense of belonging curdled quickly into a realization of inescapable danger. The subtle tension in Tokyo shifted. The races became less about proving skill and more about survival. Sean and Neela found themselves relying on the remaining loyal contacts within Han's network, piecing together the puzzle of Han's final dealings. They began to see patterns in Han's seemingly random advice, recognizing that every cryptic comment about balance and forward momentum was actually a coded warning or a set of survival instructions. They understood that Han, knowing his time was limited, had strategically positioned Sean to win, not just to save face, but to equip him with the credibility needed to either escape or fight back. The victory was the bait, and now Sean was on the hook, drawing the attention of the sharks Han had been swimming around. The next challenge would not be on a mountain road against an arrogant rival, but in the shadows against professionals who used violence as their preferred method of execution, a stark reminder that in the world Han inhabited, the fastest cars sometimes belonged to the undertakers. The lingering scent of burnt rubber and coolant on Akina felt less like a trophy and more like a warning flare. Sean, now operating under the heavy mantle of a victor, found the adoration of the local drivers to be hollow. Their respect was tied strictly to the outcome of the last race, and he knew that in the intricate, dangerous ecosystem Han had navigated, reputation was ephemeral. Only power and debts held true currency. Neela, his closest confidant, moved with a strained composure, her eyes constantly scanning the periphery. Her expertise with engines now served a dual purpose, maintaining the high-performance vehicles necessary for quick escapes and interpreting the subtle changes in the machinery driven by those who now seemed to watch them. A slight hesitation in a gear shift, an unusual alignment on a parked car. She represented the promise of a stable future, one rooted in shared mechanical passion. But that promise was constantly overshadowed by the looming threat. Han's apparent death had been a calculated, devastating explosion of information. It wasn't just the end of a man. It was the deliberate termination of a high-stakes negotiation. The syndicate Han was entangled with, a cold, efficient machine that operated far above the amateur theatrics of street drifting, saw Han's absence not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to reclaim lost assets or silence a loose end. Sean, elevated by his victory, inadvertently became the focal point of that reclamation effort. He was the visible protégé, the easy target to flush out any hidden assets or information Han might have buried. This shifted Sean's internal dynamic from competitive ambition to protective necessity. He was racing now not for glory, but to stay one step ahead of predators who viewed human lives as expendable collateral. The investigation into Han's fate was slow, methodical, and deeply dangerous. They realized Han had built multiple escape routes, physical and digital, following clues left in cryptic notes tucked inside the S-15's glove compartment, references to harbors, shipping manifests, and coded drop points. Sean and Neela began to peel back layers of Han's double life. Han hadn't been merely a drifter. He had been a highly effective, extremely cautious logistics expert operating on the fringes of organized crime, perhaps moving goods too sensitive for standard channels. This realization explained his almost superhuman composure under pressure. He wasn't just anticipating the next corner, he was anticipating the next decade. One tense evening, while examining Han's hidden workshop, they found the final piece of the puzzle, a pristine, customized Nissan GT-R, the kind of machine built for absolute, unquestionable speed, not drifting, but escape. Tucked beneath the driver's seat was a final, handwritten note, addressed simply to Sean. It confirmed Han was not killed by accident. He had orchestrated his own spectacular exit to sever ties with the syndicate permanently, knowing that only his apparent death would buy Sean enough time and credibility to walk away clean. The message was simple. The race is over when you stop looking in the rearview mirror. It was a final, profound act of paternal guidance, transferring the burden of survival onto the young man he had taken under his wing. The implication was clear. Use the GT-R, disappear, and build a life outside the neon glare, honoring the sacrifice by actually living free. The discovery of the GT-R felt like inheriting a ghost ship ready for a final voyage. The machine itself was a testament to Han's meticulous planning, a weapon disguised as a masterpiece of engineering, built not for the sideways artistry of the drift, but for blistering, straight-line evasion. Sean touched the cold metal, feeling the weight of Han's calculated sacrifice. It wasn't an ending, it was a brutal graduation ceremony. The note confirmed everything. Han had not been a victim in the conventional sense. He had executed a perfect disappearing act, using his own perceived demise as the ultimate distraction to break free from the syndicate's suffocating grip. This elevated Han from a tragic mentor to a legend of calculated self-preservation, a man who valued his freedom more than his reputation. For Sean and Neela, the choice was stark: stay in Tokyo, basking in the temporary glory of Akina, while the syndicate inevitably tracked them down to tie up loose ends, or take the GTR and vanish, honoring Han's final command to live. Neela, usually the picture of stoic composure, showed a flicker of fear that crystallized into resolve. Her connection to Sean was no longer just a shared affinity for engines, it was a mutual commitment to survival, a bond forged in the crucible of shared loss and deception. She saw in Sean the potential to escape the toxic cycles of influence that trapped people like Takashi and, tragically, Han himself. They spent the following days dismantling the legend of Sean Boswell, the reckless American drifter. They quietly sold off the recognizable S-15, exchanging the hard-earned cash for untraceable necessities. The pressure mounted relentlessly. Every dark alley seemed to hold an observer. Every routine traffic stop felt like an interrogation. The Tokyo they once saw as a playground of speed had transformed into a concrete labyrinth designed for their capture. The city that had offered him a chance at redemption now demanded his life as payment for his mentor's final act of rebellion. The departure was orchestrated under the cover of a dense, unseasonal fog rolling in from the bay, a perfect cover for ghosting the city. As Sean slid into the driver's seat of the GTR, the familiar feel of the high-performance machine under him was strangely comforting, yet heavy with implied meaning. It wasn't his car. It was his inheritance, his escape route, and his final promise to Han. Neela sat beside him, her presence grounding him, her eyes fixed on the side mirrors. They weren't driving to a destination, they were driving away from a past that had just become lethally retroactive. As they merged onto the expressway, moving with an efficiency utterly devoid of showmanship, Sean finally understood the true meaning of Han's teaching. Mastery wasn't about being the fastest on the mountain, it was about knowing precisely when to leave the game entirely. They disappeared into the urban sprawl, carrying the silence of the secrets Han had entrusted them with, stepping into the vast, unknown future that only the truly invisible could inhabit. The highway stretched out before them, a ribbon of monochrome illuminated by the blurred taillights of lesser vehicles. The sheer, unadulterated power of the GTR was restrained, a sleeping beast that Sean now controlled with a light touch, a drastic contrast to the aggressive handling he'd favored just weeks prior. This was not racing, this was calculated velocity, an act of shedding identity. Neela, observing the surroundings with a vigilance that belied her technical focus, suddenly pointed toward the rearview monitor, her voice tight. "They're running a perimeter check near the docks, heavy presence. They aren't looking for a drag racer. They're looking for a ghost." This acknowledgement confirmed their fears. The syndicate was indeed pursuing the assets Han had hidden, and Sean was now the most visible link to those secrets. The freedom Han had bought him was perishable, expiring rapidly with every passing hour they remained in the vicinity of their last known location. Sean instinctively pushed the accelerator just enough to maintain separation, the engine note a deep, resonant thrum that spoke of purpose, not vanity. He reflected on the men who had tried to teach him, Dom Toretto, whose lessons revolved around unwavering loyalty to a chosen family, and now Han, whose ultimate lesson was that sometimes true loyalty demanded self-erasure for the safety of others. Sean felt a profound kinship with Han in that moment, recognizing the quiet strength of a man who understood that survival often required forfeiting the stage. As they crossed into the jurisdiction of a different prefecture, the tension eased slightly, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the Akina victory finally waned, leaving behind the reality of their situation. Fugitives with nothing but a stolen identity and a world-class getaway car. Neela leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture devoid of romance, heavy instead with shared trauma. "Where do we go now, Sean?" she murmured. The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Tokyo, which had briefly felt like home, was now toxic ground. The next step required distance, anonymity, and perhaps the kind of resources that even Han, for all his clandestine genius, couldn't fully provide. Sean glanced over at the navigation system, which still displayed the last set of coordinates Han had keyed in before his orchestrated exit, a location impossibly far, suggesting a planned rendezvous or a long-term safe harbor. It was a leap of faith based entirely on trusting the judgment of a dead man. "Somewhere they won't think to look," Sean replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "Somewhere where the only race that matters is the one against time." The GTR devoured the miles, carrying them away from the neon promises of Tokyo and toward an uncertain future, one where the skills learned on the asphalt might just keep them alive on the open road, a silent, high-speed tribute to the Drift King who never was, and the mentor who finally found peace by disappearing entirely. The GTR ate up the distance, transforming the sprawling urban landscape into an abstract blur that emphasized their isolation. Sean drove with an almost trance-like focus, the car's sophisticated stability control system a steadying influence against the chaotic uncertainty of their escape. He was no longer the impulsive teenager, he was an executor, completing a final critical mission assigned by his fallen sensei. Neela, meanwhile, had pivoted from analyzing the road ahead to monitoring the digital noise around them. She used Han's encrypted satellite phone, a device they'd found hidden beneath the GTR's floor panel, to scan the dark web chatter, looking for any ripples from the syndicate that might indicate their pursuers were closing in with specialized tracking technology. The coordinates Han had programmed led them south, not toward the usual ports of entry, but toward a remote, rugged coastline, hinting at a method of exit far more clandestine than commercial air travel. As they traveled, the emotional weight of Han's sacrifice became a constant passenger. Sean realized that Han hadn't just taught him to drift, he had taught him about calculated risk, the necessity of cutting ties, and the profound difference between showing off and being truly effective. This understanding was the real inheritance, far more valuable than any modified Nissan. It was the knowledge that sometimes, to win the long game, you had to willingly accept the appearance of defeat. When they finally reached the designated area, it wasn't a bustling port, but a sparsely populated, almost forgotten stretch of rocky shore. There, nestled in a dilapidated, unmarked warehouse overlooking the churning Pacific, they found the final manifestation of Han's foresight, a moderately sized, high-speed offshore vessel provisioned for long-term self-sufficiency. Beside the boat was a large crate, obviously containing more of Han's carefully curated resources, tools, documentation, and perhaps even more vehicles tucked away for future use. A contingency plan for a contingency plan. Neela opened the crate with a quiet awe. Inside, among spare electronics and medical supplies, was a final sealed envelope addressed to Sean. The paper felt thick, official. Inside, instead of another cryptic message, was a series of legitimate-looking passports and identity documents bearing their pictures but new names, complete with clean financial histories funded by Han's expertly laundered offshore accounts. This wasn't just an escape, it was a complete, meticulously constructed second life, ready for immediate activation. Han had not only ensured their survival, but had engineered their rebirth, demonstrating a level of care and dedication to Sean that rivaled the bonds of biological family. Standing on the edge of the continent, the ocean wind whipping around them, Sean looked back one last time toward the distant, glittering sprawl of Tokyo. The city that had almost consumed him now seemed like a distant, feverish dream. He took Neela's hand, a real smile finally touching his lips, unburdened by the need to prove anything to anyone. They boarded the boat, slipping the moorings as the first rays of dawn touched the water. The GTR, the magnificent symbol of their confrontation and escape, was left behind, a final beautiful offering to the asphalt and the memory of the man who taught them how to truly drive away. Their journey was not over, but the nature of the race had fundamentally changed. It was now a silent, steady pursuit of peace, earned through the ultimate sacrifice of speed and spectacle. The salt-laced air of the Pacific felt clean against Sean's lungs, a sharp, invigorating antidote to the stale, confined atmosphere of Tokyo's underground. As the boat cut smoothly through the waves, heading toward a horizon that promised nothing but vastness, Sean felt the last vestiges of his old self, the impulsive, desperate American kid, dissolve into the wake. The GTR, sitting abandoned but pristine in the warehouse, was the perfect punctuation mark on that chapter, a symbol of the power he had mastered only to choose to leave behind. Han understood that true strength wasn't in holding on to the best tool, it was in knowing when that tool had served its purpose and could be safely discarded to eliminate a traceable link. Neela, navigating the boat's systems with an expert eye that belied her years, was the only tether Sean truly needed. Their connection was one built on shared secrets and mutual respect for the technical ballet of survival, far deeper than the dramatic, fraught relationships of their recent past. She had shed the obligations tied to Takashi and the toxic environment surrounding the Yakuza influence, embracing the anonymity offered by Han's careful preparations. In the relative quiet of the open sea, they spoke little of the past, their conversation revolving around engine diagnostics, navigation vectors, and the quiet planning for their immediate future, small, manageable goals that stood in stark contrast to the life-or-death gambles they had just escaped. The new identities felt strange, almost like ill-fitting costumes, but the documentation was flawless, a final, perfect piece of operational security from Han. They were heading toward a location whispered about in the deeper circles of international logistics, a place where skilled individuals could integrate without excessive scrutiny, a place where mechanical aptitude was currency. It wasn't a retirement, it was a strategic redeployment. Sean now carried the silent understanding that the fast life, the one filled with nitrous and high stakes, was often a trap designed to keep powerful people occupied while the real power players moved in the shadows. Han had been one of those shadows, and now, by following his map, Sean and Neela were stepping into the deeper shade. Looking out at the endless blue, Sean knew the threat hadn't vanished entirely, it had merely been distanced. The Syndicate would eventually realize Han was not just dead, but missing, and they would likely devote significant resources to tracing the one person who benefited most from his apparent demise, Sean Boswell. But for now, they had bought time, the most valuable commodity in their dangerous new world. Han's final silent gift wasn't just a boat and new passports, it was the permission to stop performing for an audience. The next leg of their journey would be quiet, deliberate, and focused entirely on staying invisible, honoring the memory of the mentor who showed them that sometimes the fastest way forward is to leave the race entirely behind. The roar of the engine was no longer a challenge, it was the steady heartbeat of a life reclaimed. The steady thrum of the offshore engine became their new soundtrack, a monotonous rhythm that slowly sandpapered away the sharp edges of anxiety. Sean found himself staring at the horizon, not searching for landmarks, but rather for the absence of the neon glare that had defined his recent existence. He had learned that speed, untethered from purpose, was merely noise. Han's influence was becoming clearer now. The true race wasn't between two drivers on a mountain pass. It was the relentless internal negotiation between ambition and survival. He realized that Han, perhaps due to past experiences, maybe a close call in his own life or witnessing the self-destruction of peers like those Dom Toretto often warned about, had prioritized extrication over confrontation. Neela, examining a satellite weather map, pointed toward a projected area of dense, unpredictable maritime activity. "We need to cross into that system before midday," she stated, her voice gaining confidence as she took command of the navigation. "It'll give us a decent window of radar shadow before we hit the established shipping lanes near the coast. They won't be looking for a private vessel moving like a fishing trawler through a squall." Her practicality was Sean's bedrock. Where he might have been tempted to push the boat's speed for a dramatic entrance into their new life, she insisted on adherence to the calculated slow burn of Han's escape plan. She understood that the syndicate's resources were vast. They couldn't outrun surveillance indefinitely, but they could certainly exploit meteorological chaos. As they prepared the boat for the rough weather, Sean discovered a small, waterproof case tucked beneath the pilot's seat, one Han must have placed just before enacting his final scene. Inside were not more documents, but a collection of high-end, rare automotive microchips, the kind used in next-generation engine management systems, far beyond anything available on the open market. Attached was a final, simple note: build something that matters, something clean. It was Han's final blessing, an instruction to channel their shared mechanical passion toward creation rather than destruction, a path away from the easy money and quick thrills of the criminal underworld. It was the quietest challenge he could issue: prove you can succeed legitimately. The storm hit with punishing suddenness, the boat pitching violently. In the chaos, gripping the wheel as spray lashed across the deck, Sean felt a surge of something unexpected: gratitude. He wasn't just escaping danger, he was inheriting a blueprint for a different kind of life, one built on Han's wisdom about patience and precision. The life they were heading toward would be mundane compared to the thrill of Tokyo drifts, but it would be theirs, unburdened by Yakuza debts or the ghosts of mentors past. As the boat plunged through a massive wave, Sean looked at Neela, seeing not just a survivor, but a partner in building this quiet, mechanical future. The fast life was over, replaced by the slow, determined drive toward a horizon only they could see. The storm eventually subsided, leaving behind a sea that looked bruised but calm, mirroring the fragile state of Sean and Neela's nerves. Emerging from the tempest, they navigated toward the remote coast Han's coordinates indicated, a place that felt deliberately forgotten by the modern world. The location was not a thriving port, but a tiny, isolated dock bordering a region known for its specialized, high-tech manufacturing, a place where skilled engineers and mechanics could disappear into legitimate, if often discreet work. It was Han's final staging ground, a place where the blueprints of a new life were meant to be realized, far from the reach of Tokyo's long shadow. Upon landing, they found a small, modern workshop adjacent to the dock, surprisingly well-equipped despite its remote location. It was sterile, efficient, and lacked any of the romantic grime associated with their previous racing environments, a true reflection of Han's final lesson: move beyond the spectacle. Sean realized that Han hadn't just left them supplies, he had set up a sustainable foundation. The crate contained advanced diagnostic tools and the promised high-end chips, enough to power several groundbreaking engine builds. This wasn't about building drift cars for notoriety. This was about applying their intimate knowledge of performance dynamics to create something technologically superior, something that could earn respect without demanding fear. Neela immediately set to work organizing the inventory, her focus intense. She recognized that the quiet life Han envisioned required the same discipline as a perfect drift sequence. Every component had to be in its precise place. Sean, meanwhile, felt the immense weight of expectation tied to the microchips. He understood that these components were immensely valuable and likely the source of the syndicate's original interest in Han. Perhaps Han had been skimming the R&D or diverting proprietary technology. Using them for legitimate builds was both a tribute and a direct thumbing of the nose at their former adversaries. They were using stolen leverage to build an honest future. Their immediate task became establishing a low profile. They initiated small, carefully vetted contracts, focusing on performance tuning for specialized off-road and marine applications, work that kept them busy, utilized their skills, and kept them largely invisible to international syndicates focused on major urban centers. Sean found a quiet satisfaction in this methodical, patient work. The thrill of the immediate win was replaced by the slow, rewarding certainty of a job done right, a concept he was only beginning to truly grasp. He looked at Neela, who was sketching out designs for a custom marine fuel injection system, and saw not just a fellow survivor, but a partner building a sanctuary brick by careful mechanical brick. The ghost of Han lingered, not as a haunting, but as a constant, silent standard of excellence, urging them to build something that truly mattered, something that could never be taken away. The high-speed chase had ended. The long-endurance run toward true autonomy had just begun. The isolation of their new coastal haven was both a blessing and a subtle torment. Every perfectly tuned engine they worked on was a muted scream of what could have been, a quiet testament to the explosive speed they had willingly abandoned. Sean often caught himself watching the horizon where the water met the sky, half expecting a black helicopter or a sleek, unmarked speedboat to materialize, sent by the remnants of the syndicate eager to reclaim Han's misplaced assets or silence the last loose end. The financial security Han provided was vast enough to sustain them for years, but it felt tainted, a constant reminder of the perilous network they had severed ties with. Neela, focused intensely on integrating the advanced microchips into a new generation of high-efficiency turbos, was their shield against digital detection. She established a complex system of digital misdirection, feeding false data trails into the global network, creating phantom identities and shell corporations that Han's original intelligence suggested the syndicate often used to monitor threats. She moved with the assurance of someone who had found her true calling, not simply fixing cars, but engineering invisibility. Her hands, adept at handling delicate circuitry, were always steady, grounding Sean whenever the sheer magnitude of their escape threatened to overwhelm him with paranoia. Sean, meanwhile, found his outlet in the physical construction of the new machines. He started applying the physics of drifting, the precise understanding of weight transfer and momentum, to entirely different applications. He was building custom, near-silent propulsion systems, machines designed for endurance and efficiency, not for short, spectacular bursts of speed. This required a patience he hadn't possessed in Tokyo, forcing him to slow down, to analyze every tolerance, every potential failure point. He realized that Han's mentorship had been less about teaching him how to drive fast, and more about teaching him how to control the forces around him, a lesson now applied to engineering their very existence. One quiet evening, while reviewing Han's contingency files, Sean discovered a single encrypted video log dated shortly before the Akina race. He played it, and Han's calm, familiar face filled the small monitor. Han didn't speak of strategy or debt. He spoke simply of legacy. He mentioned how he had always admired the fierce, if misguided, ambition of the young American racers, acknowledging that while some thrive in the chaos, others, like himself and perhaps Sean, needed an exit strategy rooted in creation. Han admitted his own involvement with the syndicate had been a prolonged, necessary evil to fund an eventual break, a break he knew would cost him everything. The video ended with Han smiling faintly. "Don't waste the second chance, kid. Build something that earns its own speed." This final address solidified their purpose. They were no longer running from something. They were driving toward the legitimate mastery Han had envisioned for them. The microchips were the seed capital for their new venture, a performance engineering firm built on absolute discretion and unparalleled technical skill. The danger from the syndicate hadn't vanished, but it had receded into the background noise, manageable because Sean and Neela were finally operating outside the parameters of the game they had been forced to play. They were no longer racers. They were architects of superior engineering, forever indebted to the ghost who taught them that the greatest victory is the one nobody ever sees coming. The air in the remote workshop, once thick with the metallic tang of potential escape, now settled into the clean ozone scent of high-grade electronics and precision lubricants. Sean and Neela operated in a symbiotic silence, their movements economical, reflecting the philosophy Han had hammered into them. No wasted energy. They were past the frantic energy of evasion. They were now engaged in the sustained, quiet effort of construction. The isolation, initially a source of anxiety, had become their greatest asset, a necessary vacuum where external pressures could not interfere with their meticulous work. Sean found himself sketching designs that incorporated the principles of aerodynamic stability from high-speed cornering, translating them into hull designs for their marine projects. He used the principles of drift, managing the transition point between grip and slip, to engineer highly responsive, near-instantaneous torque delivery in their custom engines. He was no longer forcing power, he was guiding it, a far more satisfying and sustainable form of control. The frustration that had once manifested as aggressive driving now channeled into refining tolerances down to the micron level. He was finally understanding that Han's legacy wasn't about the drift. It was about mastery over physics. Neela, her face often illuminated solely by the glow of her monitors, had successfully cloaked their digital footprint so thoroughly that even the most sophisticated surveillance would likely register them as a minor, entirely legitimate marine outfitting service. She reveled in the complexity of digital defense, finding in it the same intellectual challenge as tuning an intricate engine mapping. She often traced the lines of Han's final log file, not just for operational data, but searching for a glimpse of the man behind the myth. She realized Han hadn't just been pragmatic. He had been profoundly tired of the violence, seeking a quiet end where his skills could still contribute something positive. One evening, while calibrating the new turbos using Han's rare chips, Sean stumbled upon a physical anomaly in one of the engine blocks they were refurbishing, a compartment too small for any standard component. Inside, nestled in foam, was a single, tarnished silver Zippo lighter, Dom Toretto's signature lighter, the one Han was famously given during his time in the States. It was an intentional breadcrumb, a deliberate link thrown across continents and narratives. Han hadn't just severed ties with the Yakuza, he had perhaps maintained a final, coded communication with the other loose threads of their shared, high-octane world. The sight of the lighter was jarring. It reminded Sean that the world of speed and brotherhood was larger than Tokyo, suggesting that Han's network of contacts extended far beyond the immediate dangers they had fled. It implied a larger community of self-exiled operators who valued freedom above all else. This knowledge didn't bring panic, but a sobering sense of responsibility. They weren't just starting a business, they were joining an unofficial, invisible cohort, the mechanics who knew too much and chose to build new lives rather than perpetuate the old cycles of violence. Sean carefully placed the lighter on the workbench, treating it with the reverence reserved for sacred relics. It was a silent promise that their new path, built on Han's sacrifice, would eventually lead them toward the kind of genuine, earned loyalty that transcended criminal ties. A loyalty built on shared technical genius and a mutual desire for an honest horizon. The second installment of the Fast and the Furious franchise to feature a significant departure from the street racing routes established by the original Tokyo Drift, while often viewed as an outlier in the series' canon, serves as a crucial bridge, both narratively and stylistically, that ultimately paved the way for the global action juggernaut the franchise became. Released in 2006, though set chronologically after the events of the second film, this entry wisely shifted the geographical and cultural center of gravity away from the familiar American landscape, plunging audiences into the neon-drenched, high-stakes underground world of drifting in Tokyo. Lucas Black's portrayal of Sean Boswell, an inherently troubled but exceptionally skilled American teenager, provides the necessary entry point into this alien environment. Boswell's expulsion from the U.S., motivated by reckless driving charges, sets the stage for a classic displacement narrative. His lack of cultural fluency initially isolates him, making his rapid immersion into the world of competitive drifting all the more compelling. This skill set, which he develops under duress, is less about raw American muscle car power and more about nuanced technical control, a significant thematic evolution for the series. The true magnetic force of the film, however, lies in the introduction of Han Lu, masterfully played by Sung Kang. Han is not merely a mentor, he is the embodiment of cool, philosophical detachment juxtaposed with lethal street competence. His backstory, hinted at but never fully explored in this entry, suggests a history steeped in organized crime and survival, mirroring the morally gray areas the franchise consistently explores. Han's influence on Boswell transcends mere driving instruction. He imparts a philosophy of life on the edge, encapsulated in his famous line regarding time and existence. His refined taste in cars, particularly the iconic Valeside Orange R34 and later the sleek S2000, contrasts sharply with the more brutish modifications favored by his American counterparts. Han's relaxed demeanor and calculated risks establish a benchmark for cool that the franchise would attempt to recapture repeatedly. The film excels in depicting the specialized art of drifting itself. Unlike the drag racing of the first film, drifting demands precision, G-force management, and an intuitive understanding of vehicle physics, transforming the action sequences from simple tests of speed into kinetic ballets. The environments, the cramped parking garages, the winding mountain passes known as touge, are characters unto themselves, demanding mastery over vehicle handling rather than sheer horsepower. The romantic subplot involving Neela, played by Natalie Kelly, grounds Boswell's journey, providing an emotional anchor as he navigates loyalty and betrayal within the tightly knit insular community, led by the formidable Takashi, the film's primary antagonist. Takashi, the Drift King, represents the entrenched local power structure that Boswell must overcome, not just through superior driving, but by proving his respect for the culture. His connection to the Yakuza underscores the inherent danger lurking beneath the surface of the seemingly glamorous subculture. From a production standpoint, this installment marked a pivotal moment for director Justin Lin, who would go on to shepherd the franchise through its most successful phase. Lin's visual language here, the vibrant color palette, the kinetic camera work designed to emphasize the lateral movement of the cars, and the integration of modern Japanese street fashion, established the visual blueprint for the subsequent films that would successfully merge high-octane action with a globe-trotting scope. While the film was initially met with mixed reception due to its pivot away from Vin Diesel's dominance, its eventual success in establishing new, charismatic characters and expanding the cinematic scope of street racing proved vital. Han's unforgettable exit, a moment of shocking finality that serves as a tragic counterpoint to his earlier wisdom, retrospectively recontextualizes the entire narrative, transforming this standalone detour into an essential, tragic cornerstone of the ongoing Fast saga. It is a film about finding one's place by embracing an alien discipline and, in doing so, finding a new family under the shadow of international crime. The atmosphere of Tokyo Drift is thick, with a sense of exhilarating alienation. Sean Boswell arrives as the archetypal outsider, his frustration with authority palpable even before he gets behind the wheel. His initial attempts to adapt involve clumsy imitations of driving styles he knows, which inevitably fail spectacularly against the refined expertise of the local scene. This failure isn't just about losing a race. It's about not understanding the cultural rhythm. Boswell, driven by a potent mix of teenage rebellion and a desperate need to belong, finds a strange sort of therapy in the controlled chaos of drifting. His raw talent, guided by Han's calm instruction, blossoms from brute force into finesse. We see the visceral tension in his knuckles gripping the steering wheel, the sweat forming on his brow as he attempts to thread his American car through a precision course that feels impossibly tight. Han Lu operates as the antithesis to Boswell's kinetic energy. He is stillness, personified amidst the perpetual motion. His enjoyment of life seems derived from an almost zen-like appreciation for the present moment, whether he is savoring a snack purchased from a vending machine or executing a perfect drift around a tight hairpin. This composure is what makes him so magnetic. He carries the weight of his darker past lightly. Kang imbues Han with a world-weariness that suggests he has seen far too much, making his mentorship of Sean feel almost like a penance or a final, meaningful connection before inevitable reckoning. He views cars not just as tools for speed, but as extensions of artistic expression, evidenced by the meticulous care he takes, often ignoring the high-pressure criminal elements swirling around him, focusing instead on the purity of the drive. The antagonists further define the stakes. Takashi, the reigning king, embodies an almost aristocratic pride in his domain. His driving is flawless, aggressive, and backed by the implicit threat of the Yakuza. This rivalry is therefore not merely about bragging rights, it's a cultural clash where Boswell's underdog status is amplified by his foreignness. The simmering tension between the established order and the newcomer lends the competitive sequences an undercurrent of genuine danger often missing in lesser racing films. When the drifts happen, they are shot low, emphasizing the proximity of the tires to concrete barriers, maximizing the feeling of inches separating victory from total wreckage. The sound design, particularly the high-pitched scream of tires fighting for grip, acts as the adrenaline shot for the viewer. The supporting cast, though less developed, contributes significantly to the texture of this underworld. Twinkie, for example, provides the necessary cultural translator and comic relief, bridging the gap between Boswell's American sensibilities and the Tokyo environment. Through these characters, the film successfully establishes a temporary found family dynamic, a recurring trope in the franchise where speed brings disparate individuals together under extraordinary circumstances. This Tokyo detour, while initially feeling like a narrative detour, expertly tests the core concept. That driving skill, when divorced from specific geography or car type, is the universal language these characters speak, setting up the later ensemble structure where characters from diverse racing backgrounds eventually unite. The emotional arc concludes with Boswell earning his place, not by conquering Tokyo, but by mastering its unique language of controlled sliding, finding a sense of belonging that his life back home clearly lacked. The emotional resonance of Tokyo Drift stems largely from its focus on identity forged through high-risk competition. Sean Boswell's journey mirrors the classic outsider narrative, yet his tools are mechanical rather than conversational. His initial awkwardness, the visual representation of his displacement, slowly yields to a focused intensity. We see his internal struggle manifest on the track. Every successful drift is a small victory over his own insecurity and the judgment of his peers. His eventual proficiency isn't just about beating Takashi, it is about proving his self-worth to himself in a place where his prior American life held no currency. The quiet acknowledgement from Han, a nod, a shared look over the hood of a car, carries more weight than any verbal praise. Han Lu remains the narrative's gravitational center, a masterclass in understated charisma. His philosophy, that drifting is about understanding the car's weight and resisting the urge to overcorrect, is deeply metaphorical. He teaches Boswell patience and acceptance of the moment, a vital lesson for someone constantly running from his past. Han's apparent detachment makes his eventual sacrifice all the more poignant. He embodies the idea that true mastery requires a kind of detachment from outcome, yet his underlying loyalty to his circle forces him into an untenable position. The lingering shot of the initial car crash, juxtaposed with the casual way Han exits the vehicle moments before the detonation, is a masterful piece of misdirection and emotional payload. It forces the audience, much like the later films do, to re-evaluate the gravity of the stakes previously established. Visually, the film bathes the action in a palette that screams hyper-reality. The constant motion blur, the neon reflections streaking across wet asphalt, and the almost tactile feeling of the carbon fiber and polished chrome elevate the street racing beyond mere sport into high art cinema. The sequences on Daikoku Wharf or the perilous downhill runs are not just showcases for driving prowess. They are tests of nerve set against the backdrop of immense urban beauty and inherent peril. The film successfully sells the idea that these drivers are performance artists working on the edge of disaster. Furthermore, the dynamic between Boswell and Neela complicates the simple hero-villain structure. Neela is deeply entangled in Takashi's world, representing the allure and danger of the established order. Her attraction to Boswell signals her own yearning for escape, or perhaps just a different kind of thrill, one less burdened by criminal obligation. Her vulnerability provides Boswell with a reason to fight beyond ego. It becomes about protecting his newfound connection. This relationship anchors the emotional core, ensuring that the technical aspects of the racing never entirely overshadow the human cost of living this fast. Tokyo Drift, therefore, is not just a colorful interlude. It is the crucible where the franchise's enduring themes of found family, self-discovery through mechanics, and the thin line between thrilling speed and fatal consequence were first forged with such singular stylistic force. The shift in directorial vision under Justin Lin was perhaps the most significant, though subtly executed element of this installment. Lin approached Tokyo Drift not as a continuation of Dom Toretto's family saga, which was physically absent save for a brief obligatory cameo, but as an opportunity to expand the cinematic geography and thematic breadth of the Fast universe. His cinematic language here is noticeably slicker and more stylized than the grounded, grittier feel of the first film. He utilized rapid cross-cutting between the interior monologue of the drivers, often implied through facial expressions, and the external chaos of the drift, creating a dizzying sense of speed and control simultaneously. This visual vocabulary, emphasizing momentum and stylish flair over raw aggression, became the standard against which future international set pieces would be measured. Lin understood that to make drifting cinematic, it needed to look beautiful, even when inherently dangerous. The musical score, heavily infused with electronic and J-rock elements, further cements the film's unique identity within the series. It is an auditory manifestation of the neon-lit, technologically advanced yet culturally deep setting. The music doesn't just accompany the action, it dictates the tempo of the slides and the intensity of the cultural immersion. This deliberate sonic departure from the established hip-hop and rock soundtracks of the previous films was risky, but it served to underscore Boswell's disorientation and eventual adaptation. As he learns the culture, the audience grows accustomed to its soundscape. The element of legacy and inheritance is also keenly felt. Takashi represents the burden of expectation, the pressure to uphold a title bestowed upon him by his criminal benefactors. Boswell, conversely, represents the self-made champion. His inheritance is not a throne but a set of specialized skills learned through necessity and mentorship. This contrast fuels the final race, which is less about a trophy and more about the transfer of perceived dominance from the established local hierarchy to the adaptable newcomer. When Boswell finally masters the mountain pass, it symbolizes a complete assimilation of the local ethos while retaining his outsider edge, a delicate balance that later characters in the franchise often struggle to maintain when navigating international operations. The film quietly posits that adaptability, not adherence to tradition, is the ultimate key to survival in this globalized criminal landscape. The enduring strength of Tokyo Drift lies in its creation of a highly specific, self-contained micro-universe that the main franchise would later mine for its most cherished characters. Beyond Han, the true innovation was establishing a world governed by aesthetic precision rather than brute force, forcing the audience to recalibrate their understanding of what fast truly meant within this context. The reverence for the machinery itself is almost religious. The cars are treated as sacred objects whose modifications reflect the driver's philosophical approach. For Boswell, his initial reliance on an American car ill-suited for the tight confines of Tokyo, drifting highlights his initial ignorance. A machine designed for straight-line American power feels cumbersome and out of place. His eventual triumph requires him to respect the vehicle as a tool for precise manipulation, mirroring his own internal journey toward self-control. The relationship between the American driver and the Japanese underground culture is portrayed with a necessary degree of cautious admiration. The film never fully resolves the power dynamic. Boswell wins the race, but he doesn't dismantle the Yakuza structure, which remains a looming, omnipresent threat. This subtle acknowledgement of cultural barriers and criminal realities grounds the fantasy elements. The clandestine nature of the races, often held in tunnels or under the cover of darkness, emphasizes the illicit thrill sought by these young participants, pushing against societal norms in a culture known for its rigid adherence to order. The recurring theme of time, articulated so eloquently by Han, serves as the narrative thread connecting this outlier film to the broader saga. Han's philosophy suggests a recognition of mortality and impermanence, a profound awareness that their high-speed existence is unsustainable. This foreshadowing makes his eventual fiery end, though revealed later in the franchise timeline, feel earned and tragic. His mentorship of Sean is his attempt to impart wisdom before his own clock runs out, creating a sense of urgency around Boswell's development. The sadness attached to Han is that he perfectly mastered living in the moment, yet his past caught up to him precisely because he allowed himself a moment of trust and connection within a world that punishes vulnerability. His legacy is the quiet assurance he leaves in Boswell: drive with purpose, but never forget the inherent fragility of the experience. The very aesthetic of Tokyo Drift, drenched in its vibrant, almost synthetic glow, acts as an emotional filter, softening the edges of the underlying desperation felt by its characters. This isn't the warm, familial glow of Dom's backyard barbecues. This is the cool, indifferent light of a metropolis that neither welcomes nor rejects the outsider. It simply moves around him. Sean Boswell's pursuit of belonging is underscored by his visible relief when he finally connects with the rhythm of the drift. That moment where the car stops feeling like an unruly beast and starts feeling like an extension of his will is the film's emotional apex for him. We watch him transform from a sullen, reactive teenager into a proactive artist, utilizing the very skill that got him into trouble back home as his ticket to acceptance. Natalie Kelly's Neela is vital because she represents the allure of the controlled environment. She belongs, yet she too shows signs of being constrained by Takashi's dominance and the shadow of the Yakuza. Her eyes often carry a hint of resignation, suggesting that even in success, there is a trapdoor waiting. Her brief moments of genuine joy with Sean, typically during exhilarating non-competitive drives, reveal a longing for freedom outside the defined hierarchy of the drift world. This creates a genuine dramatic tension. Is Sean offering her a genuine escape or just a temporary distraction from her difficult reality? Their connection is built on shared risk, a common currency in this high-stakes environment. The technical execution of the drifting sequences themselves demands a level of psychological absorption that mirrors the driver's focus. Lynn's camera often seems to be inside the car, experiencing the G-forces directly, making the audience an unwilling participant in the near misses. The soundscape, dominated by the mechanical shriek and the thumping electronic beat, forces a state of heightened awareness. Unlike the straightforward acceleration contests of earlier films, here, success is achieved by managing negative space, the gap between the car and the barrier. This mirrors the precarious balance the characters maintain in their lives, balancing legality with criminality, passion with duty, and life with imminent death. The film subtly argues that controlling chaos is the highest form of competence, a philosophy embodied by Han's serene mastery. This technical mastery becomes the ultimate expression of self-control in a world where external control is fleeting. The thematic weight carried by the minor characters solidifies the world building, suggesting that everyone within this transient, high-octane society has an equally compelling reason for being there. Twinkie, with his easy adaptability and role as cultural liaison, embodies the necessary fluidity required to thrive in Tokyo's underground. He is the bridge that allows Boswell access, illustrating that survival often depends not on pure skill, but on strategic alliances and understanding unspoken rules. His enthusiasm for the American perspective, however skewed, provides moments of levity that prevent the Yakuza threat from becoming suffocating. The visual contrast between the cars themselves tells a story of ideological conflict. Takashi's machinery is often pristine, perfectly maintained, reflecting his rigid adherence to established rules and tradition. The reigning king must look the part. Boswell's initial vehicles, often cobbled together or poorly suited, symbolize his status as an unrefined challenger. The evolution of his car throughout the film mirrors his personal growth. It becomes less about the badge and more about tuning the chassis and suspension to master the specific demands of the Touge. This tactile connection to the modification process humanizes the technology, making the vehicles extensions of the driver's developing psyches rather than mere props for spectacle. The film's structural success lies in its placement as a necessary deviation. It functions almost as a mythological training montage for the larger family that will eventually form in subsequent installments. Without Han's quiet example of living intensely in the present, and without Boswell's baptism by fire in a discipline requiring supreme focus, the later heroes would lack this foundational understanding of controlled risk management. Han's calm acceptance of his fate, even as he smiles while offering life advice, infuses the film with a melancholy fatalism that adds intellectual depth to the action sequences. It whispers that these adrenaline highs are borrowed time, a concept that resonates throughout the entire sprawling narrative arc of the franchise. Tokyo Drift masterfully uses its isolation to focus intensely on the mechanics of found identity, resulting in a kinetic, highly stylized character study masked as a street racing movie. The lingering impact of this film rests heavily on its masterful depiction of Han Lue as the franchise's first true icon of sophisticated cool, setting a standard that Dom Toretto, for all his dominance, could only later emulate through sheer force of personality. Han is not merely a street racer, he is a philosopher operating within a criminal milieu. His casual consumption of snacks mid-chase or mid-conversation suggests a man so completely in control of his environment that danger becomes mere background noise. This detachment is his greatest strength and, tragically, his eventual downfall. Sung Kang plays him with an economy of movement and dialogue, making every gesture, the slight tilt of the head, the patient waiting for Boswell to catch up, laden with implied meaning. He understands the ephemeral nature of their lives, which informs his gentle but firm guidance of Sean. He recognizes in the American boy the same underlying dissatisfaction that drove him to Tokyo, a shared need to outrun a previous self. This mentorship, framed by the unforgiving, slick environment of Japanese asphalt, emphasizes learning over winning. Han's lessons are about balance, about trusting the centrifugal force rather than fighting it, a metaphor for accepting the flow of life when one cannot control external circumstances. When Boswell finally executes a perfect drift, the emotional release is palpable precisely because the audience has witnessed the painstaking, often humiliating process of unlearning destructive habits. The car becomes the therapist, the track the confessional booth. Furthermore, the film's commitment to the specific subculture of drifting elevates the action above mere vehicular stunts. Drifting is inherently dramatic because it is about controlled failure. It's about deliberately losing traction and harnessing that loss. This contrasts sharply with the American obsession with maximum grip and straight-line speed. By forcing the narrative's focus onto this nuanced skill, Lin demanded a more sophisticated engagement from the audience, preparing them for the increasingly complex global set pieces to come. The necessity of tuning the suspension specifically for the incline of the mountain passes, as opposed to simply bolting on a bigger engine, grounds the action in technical reality, lending credibility to the improbable feats performed on screen. It's this detail-oriented world-building centered around Han's flawless execution that grants Tokyo Drift its lasting, almost cult-like status within the sprawling Fast universe. It provided the franchise with its intellectual backbone. The palpable sense of shared destiny among the crew is what truly elevates the emotional stakes beyond the usual teenage rivalry. They are united by their attraction to the thrill and their simultaneous estrangement from mainstream society. This found family dynamic, cemented in the tense, exhilarating environment of the drift world, becomes their primary allegiance. The camaraderie is demonstrated in the subtle ways they support each other, the shared silence when a mistake is made, the immediate regrouping after a near-catastrophic shunt. For Sean Boswell, who entered the story as a complete loner, this integration is a lifeline. His adoption into Han's orbit is less about gaining racing fame and more about finding a safe harbor where his recklessness is channeled productively rather than condemned. Takashi, the antagonist, is not merely a jealous rival. He represents the dark side of mastery, the ego that refuses to evolve. His adherence to the title of Drift King is a cage built by his family's influence and his own pride. His driving, while technically superior at times, lacks the necessary philosophical humility that Han possesses. This distinction between brute talent fueled by entitlement, Takashi, and refined skill, tempered by experience, Han, is the core ideological battle fought on the asphalt. When Boswell wins, it is not just a victory of driving skill, but a symbolic triumph of adaptability over entrenched, suffocating tradition. The recurring visual motif of tunnels and darkened cityscapes reinforces the film's exploration of shadow economies and hidden passions. These spaces are where identity is fluid and where true skill is tested outside the scrutiny of daylight society. When the cars roar through these enclosed spaces, the sound reverberates, creating a visceral, almost claustrophobic feeling that mirrors the pressure the characters feel to succeed quickly or be consumed by the environment. The high-contrast lighting, blinding headlights piercing absolute black, perfectly symbolizes the thin line between achieving brilliance and utter destruction that defines their daily existence. This film manages the difficult task of making the audience root for characters operating firmly outside the lines of legality, achieving this by emphasizing their intense personal codes of honor and loyalty to one another above all else. The deliberate pacing of the early sequences, showing Sean Boswell's initial frustration and near failure in the unfamiliar Japanese driving scene, serves a crucial narrative function. It establishes the high barrier to entry. Boswell is not immediately triumphant. He is humbled, stripped of his former identity as a hot-headed street racer, by the sheer technical sophistication required for drifting. His learning curve is steep and punctuated by spectacular failure, forcing the audience to empathize with his struggle to decode a completely new language of motion. This contrasts sharply with the effortless competence often displayed by heroes in action films. Here, competence must be earned through cultural osmosis and mechanical empathy. Han Lu's presence acts as the steadying anchor against this storm of youthful uncertainty. His understated authority stems from his complete lack of apparent fear regarding the Yakuza's involvement, suggesting he has already made peace with the precariousness of his situation. His advice transcends driving technique, often veering into life advice delivered with the wry detachment of someone observing a beautiful yet fleeting phenomenon. When Han shares his food or his car, these are not casual gestures. They are acts of profound trust in a world designed to exploit trust. This elevates his character arc from merely a mentor figure to a tragic oracle whose wisdom is inherently linked to his own impending doom within the narrative structure established later. The final confrontation on the mountain road is meticulously staged not just as a race, but as a dialogue between two opposing philosophies of driving and existence. Takashi's aggressive pursuit relies on intimidation and sheer force, attempting to push Boswell off the track through sheer pressure. Boswell, having absorbed Han's teachings, employs counterintuitive subtlety, relying on precise weight transfer and timing rather than overpowering the machine. The emotional payoff comes when Boswell manages the final, critical drift, demonstrating that he has not only mastered the technique, but has internalized the philosophy. Control is found not in dominating the environment, but in fluidly responding to it. His victory is a validation of Han's entire worldview, making the loss for Takashi symbolic of the failure of rigid entitlement against adaptive, hard-won skill. This quiet triumph of the outsider over the entrenched elite forms the emotional core that resonates long after the smoke clears. The film's dedication to visual storytelling through the cars themselves warrants further analysis. They are not merely vehicles but extensions of character identity and allegiance. Boswell's initial American muscle car is a statement of misplaced bravado, an object too heavy and unresponsive for the delicate dance required by drifting. Its eventual destruction is necessary, symbolizing the shedding of his American-centric, brute force approach to problems. In stark contrast, Han's meticulously maintained R34 Skyline represents the pinnacle of engineering harmony and personal style. It is fast, yes, but more importantly, it is balanced and purposeful. The evolution of the vehicles tracked throughout the film visually maps the driver's psychological progress. They move from external modifications to internal understanding of chassis dynamics. This focus on mechanical nuance over mere horsepower provided the franchise with a more technically sophisticated vocabulary for action sequences moving forward, emphasizing precision engineering alongside stunt driving. Moreover, the cultural exchange portrayed is carefully managed to avoid caricature, focusing instead on shared passion, overriding linguistic or social barriers. The way the Japanese drivers react to Boswell's initial clumsiness transitions to respect only when he demonstrates genuine effort and aptitude for their specialized art form. This speaks to the core theme that in this specific underground, mastery earns respect more swiftly and absolutely than lineage or background. The acceptance he receives upon winning is silent, conveyed through nods and inclusion in the circle, reinforcing that belonging here is earned through tangible performance, a stark difference from the blood ties often emphasized in other installments of the series. This temporary family unit, bonded by tire smoke and shared risk, illustrates the franchise's enduring commitment to the theme of chosen kinship over biological obligation. The stylistic choice to utilize such a saturated, almost hyper-real color palette, the deep blues, electric pinks, and vibrant oranges, serves to heighten the sense of living outside conventional reality. Tokyo, in this depiction, is a playground where rules are suspended for those skilled enough to navigate its ephemeral beauty. This visual language effectively romanticizes the illicit activities, making the danger feel more like a necessary spice than a genuine threat, at least until Han's storyline intrudes with its tragic finality. This visual escapism is what allowed the film to be so successful as a standalone entity, even though its narrative connection to the main saga was tenuous.